Attention on countdown at 2. This is the launch conductor. Today, as we bring the Titan program to a historic close, I'd like to remind the team to remain focused on the tasks that remain ahead. Mission success must be our commitment to the very end.
Vandenberg Air Force Base, Central California. Day dawns on the end of an era. T-minus 9 hours and counting. A Colossus waits for its final flight. On the launch pad, Titan 4B-26. A giant 20 stories high, poised to roar into space. For the last time in 50 years, everything is riding on Titan. If there were no wars, no enemies, no rogue countries or leaders, perhaps there never would have been a need for Titan. But in the years following World War II, sabers were rattling, and the United States was alarmed by the words and deeds of the Soviet Union. It was the beginning of a Cold War between the two superpowers. President Eisenhower could not ignore the need for a swift and decisive deterrent.
Our country has come through a painful period of trial and disillusionment since the victory of 1945. We anticipated a world of peace and cooperation. The calculated pressures of aggressive communism have forced us instead to live in a world of turmoil. From this costly experience, we have learned one clear lesson. We have learned that the free world cannot indefinitely remain in a posture of paralyzed tension. To do so leaves forever to the aggressor the choice of time and place and means to cause greatest hurt to us, at least cost to himself.
The United States worried about the nuclear havoc that could be wreaked by the Soviet Union. The U.S. government recognized the need to have an alternative to the Atlas intercontinental ballistic missile. Conventional strength was no longer enough, and President Eisenhower decided to fast-track a missile that would be a national security insurance policy, a deterrent so powerful that no country would dare threaten us. It would eventually be named after giants of Greek mythology. We called it Titan.
We needed to deter an attack against the United States. And the ICBM at that particular point in time was considered as the ultimate weapon. In 30 minutes, you could launch from either the US or from the Soviet Union and hit any target with a 5,500-mile ICBM. And 30 minutes later, a town could be in rubble.
A megaton of might. The Air Force gave marching orders. Build us a ballistic missile capable of delivering a nuclear warhead at least 5,500 miles onto a specific target. To the bidders, they provided parameters: throw weight, range, time to target, guidance capability, and one last caveat. The Air Force said it had to be built away from the coasts.
They were worried about submarine launches of some sort of missile or something from a Soviet sub off the East Coast and off the West Coast. So the idea of the Air Force in those days, in the 50s, and the Cold War, beginning of the real serious part of the Cold War, was to divest from the coast and move major build plants inland.
The Martin Company picked Denver. Competition for the job was intense. The company was battling other well-respected contractors like Lockheed and Douglas. On the table was a design for a modular 100-foot-tall missile with a two-stage airframe. It came down to one final meeting in October of 1955. What do you think is the most critical problem? Air Force consultant Simon Ramo asked. Chief Engineer Bill Purdy sweated through his answer. It would make or break the deal. Ignition at high altitude and reliability, he answered. And then Purdy waited.
We were all pretty naive in those days. I looked at this thing, and then I found out what it was supposed to do. It's going to go 5,000 miles, and it's going to come in, back in the atmosphere, and hit a target where you want it, like right on. Whoa, these guys were crazy.
The Martin Company got the job. On February 6, 1956, ground was broken for the new Waterton facility outside of Denver. Production would be spread over the 7,000-acre site. Within a year, production was underway. 6 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day. The foothills of the Rocky Mountains provided an ideal location to build and captively test fire the new missile system. The Titan engines built by Aerojet General came to life. Exactly 3 years after groundbreaking, on February 6, 1959, the first Titan ICBM was poised on the launch pad at Cape Canaveral.
Seconds, mark. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
The noise is deafening, and it's more than just the noise. You feel like, you know, the world might be coming to an end.
LLC looks good. Water console, let's get the water off.
Just feeling the pressure just beating up against my chest, hearing this incredibly loud rumble, and watching it go forever with this large contrail coming out. Just a gorgeous sight to see.
Still here. But she's still steady on track.
The euphoria was short-lived. Rocket science is fraught with trial and error. And after 4 spectacular successes, engineers were soon deflated by 3 failures, almost in a row.
As far as early launch failures were concerned, we had many, and again, we consider those learning experiences more than failures, because really we were pioneering at this time. We did not know a lot about how to do the things that are pretty fundamental today.
They didn't point fingers, just learned from their mistakes and got back to work.
I never lost confidence, and neither did the team that was working the program. We were always disappointed and knew we'd have to answer to someone when we had failures, but we kept on going. And we never lost confidence with respect to being able to get the job done. Never.
See on countdown of 1. Go ahead. Yes, notify you to begin tower roll preparations, part alpha on payload support net 2. Roger.
The count continues. T-minus 6 hours and counting. Teams of controllers are preparing to move the mobile service tower away from the last Titan launch vehicle.
Pack Control LCDR.
Spec Control.
You're clear to proceed with final MSC preps for movement.
Roger, check 216.
Check 216.
On countdown of 1.
Go ahead.
This LCDR notifying you to begin tower roll preparations, part Bravo on countdown of 1.
Roger, in work.
Check 173.
In August 1962, right on schedule, headlines proclaimed that the Titan was war-ready. The new ICBMs became operational, standing guard in missile silos in 5 states. Each silo was reinforced with enough steel to build 13 naval destroyers and was hardened with enough concrete to lay 510 miles of sidewalk. The only thing that could hurt them was a direct nuclear blow. Should it be needed, a Titan would rise on an elevator, then fire packing 300,000 pounds of thrust and travel at a speed of over 15,000 miles an hour to annihilate any aggressor, period. But having superior ICBM capability was not enough. The United States needed to be able to get the missiles off the ground more quickly. The Air Force wanted a missile that could be airborne in seconds. The 12 minutes it took to raise Titan I from its silo was an eternity in precarious times. Titan I was vulnerable, so even before it was off the ground, plans were underway for Titan II, a more streamlined successor that would launch directly from its silo. While America beefed up its arsenal, the Soviets continued to boldly menace and destabilize the world.
We must realize that we cannot coexist eternally. One of us must go to his grave. The Americans in the West do not want to go to their grave, so what can be done? We must push them to their grave.
Rhetoric became reality in 1962. The Soviets pushed the United States to the brink of war when they deployed nuclear missiles to neighboring Cuba. For 13 days in October, the unthinkable was not so far-fetched. World War III was on the horizon.
When I was out at Vandenberg Air Force Base, the Cuban crisis came along, Cuban Missile Crisis. And the Air Force asked us, Martin, to get the missile ready for launch as soon as we could.
I found out during the 13 days when I was trying to figure out how I was going to save my family, I found out that the warheads on the Titans that were out at Vandenberg had all been changed to live warheads. Now I was scared. Now I knew we meant business.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
Nuclear catastrophe was hanging by a thread. Military alert was raised to DEFCON 2, the highest level ever in U.S. history. The Titan missiles, fully armed in their silos, were ready to defend the nation. The actions of President Kennedy and his cabinet during those difficult days, hours, and minutes diverted the United States and the Soviet Union from possible nuclear annihilation. Khrushchev and Kennedy were eyeball to eyeball. Thankfully, one of them blinked.
And there's no question in my mind, we had a superior ICBM capability to the Russians. And that in itself provided the deterrent when we backed Khrushchev down in the Cuban Missile Crisis.
So that was a day that the Titan came through, and another milestone, another check mark in the good life of Titan.
54 Titan II missiles would be deployed in hardened holes in the ground at Air Force bases in Kansas, Arizona, and Arkansas. The missile silos would be small fortified cities several miles apart, where a 4-man crew would live and work 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Life on alert was often boring, sometimes intense, but always critical. In the 24 years it stood sentinel, Titan II was the keeper of the peace. And even though no Titans were ever fired in anger, their very presence made the United States too powerful to attack. Of all the arms in America's arsenal, the Soviet Union feared Titan the most, and for a quarter century, the Titan missile kept the wolf at bay. During the years that Titan II protected America, it also helped propel the country into space. In May 1961, President Kennedy threw out a challenge.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
America was in a race with the Soviets to land a man on the moon, a race the United States refused to lose.
I was lucky enough to be at the Cape in February of 1962 when John Glenn went into orbit in a Mercury capsule on top of an Atlas. I said to myself, boy, I wish that an astronaut would go on a Titan.
Shortly after President Kennedy threw down the gauntlet, NASA chose Titan II as the launch vehicle for the Gemini program. The giant booster had the muscle to hurl a capsule with 2 men into orbit. The Gemini program was the second in a 3-stage assault on the moon. First Mercury, then Gemini, finally Apollo. On March 23, 1965, astronauts Gus Grissom and John Young became the first men to ride a Titan rocket into space. Putting men in orbit was a daunting task.
So when you put 2 men on top of one of them sticks of dynamite and pull the trigger, and you don't kill him, you're doing good. You know?
Between 1964 and 1966, NASA proved man could dock, rendezvous, and walk in space, all essential steps before America could land a man on the moon. In 12 Gemini missions, Titan performed flawlessly, 100% mission success. And to the astronauts riding on Titan, it was the experience of a lifetime.
In the Gemini Titan, you were in orbit in 5 minutes and 35 seconds. And particularly the staging sequence and that second stage burnout was a real kick that you will never forget. And of course, designed as a ballistic missile in the sequence, when the first stage shut down, you were riding and you pushed back in there about 5.5 Gs, and suddenly it shuts down. And they go through a sequence they still use today called fire in the hole, where they fire the second stage before the bolts explode. So you're sitting there and wham, you go from 5.5 Gs down to 0 G. There's a big flash of fire, you fly through the fire and you're gone. And even though some of the staging sequence on Apollo was unique, that fire in the hole in Gemini was really unbelievable. And then as you kept going on the second stage, you couldn't hardly hear the engines run. You knew something was going back there with that single thrust chamber, and just this force kept pulling up more and more and more, and finally you got up near 8 Gs pushing on you. You'd get a few little stomach pains, but you'd be hanging on there, and suddenly in 1/10 of a second, you went from nearly 8 Gs to 0 G, just whop. So you picked up, oh golly, 1,500 miles an hour in the last 10 seconds on that Titan. It was a kick. It was really a sporty ride.
Ready. CC.
Go.
LCM.
Go.
Pad control.
Go.
TE.
Go.
BPDS.
Go.
PLPE.
Go.
ATK.
Go.
BOC.
Go.
Flight controls.
Go.
Task 15, tower rollback. We are checked with all items through item 304.
Driver operator, bring her east. Nice and easy.
Me, I'll take a check on 285.
We have movement. Check 285.
Copy.
Good speed, looking good. Driver operator, give me position every 15 feet.
Just in time tower roll.
There you go. That's what he's known for.
That's a fact.
Copy, movement 3. UT is in launch position, pin and locked.
Roger, this time at item 306, tower roll is complete. Check 306.
The 24-story tower has rolled back to expose the last member of a supreme family that carried the weight of a nation on its mighty shoulders. Soon the pad will be evacuated and Titan will wait alone for its moment. With the strategic missiles in place and the Gemini missions accomplished, Titan production was to end. But its pioneers envisioned a metamorphosis for the missile. They worked to transform Titan into a modular space launch vehicle that could be configured to do a variety of tough jobs. It would be a bigger rocket with 2 solid fuel boosters and a new upper stage configuration that could pack the punch needed to launch the nation's biggest payloads.
Prior to the Titan program, we could only maintain satellites in low Earth orbit for a matter of a few days to at best a couple of weeks. The advent of the Titan gave us the ability to extend the expendables on board our satellites such that we could keep them on orbit for months to up to a couple of years. That gave us the ability to monitor the test activities and developmental activities of the Soviet Union on a continuing basis.
In the 1960s, this new Titan was born. Titan III was pressed into service as the country's premier space lift vehicle and quickly became America's workhorse. At 160 feet tall, the Titan IIIC struck an impressive pose with its 2 solid fuel boosters and a new upper stage. With its building block configuration, the giant rocket routinely placed heavy payloads into a variety of orbits, some more than 20,000 miles above the Earth. Most important, it boosted satellites into orbit to keep an eye on a Soviet nemesis that continued to grow more arrogant.
Well, the Titan program was really the key to our ability to do our job during the Cold War. This country needed to have the ability to understand what weapon systems the Soviet Union was really developing. We couldn't possibly afford to protect the country against all potential or technically possible weapon systems. So we needed to have an understanding of what the Soviets were really developing and what their true capabilities were.
Emerging national security requirements during the Cold War required increased vigilance. Air surveillance was no longer enough. The capture of Gary Powers and destruction of his U-2 spy plane sparked one of the biggest international crises of the decade. The United States had to have a bird's-eye view from thousands of miles up in space. Hopes were riding on Titan to help protect the nation from Soviet threats. The poster child of the surveillance satellites was a top-secret photo reconnaissance system called Corona, photographing over 1 million miles of Russian terrain from space. With its 24-inch focal-length lens and 70mm film, Corona could zero in on a target just meters in size. The pictures were then parachuted to Earth and intercepted by special airplanes in midair. Nearly all the information the United States had on the Soviet Union at the time came from the Corona missions launched on a Titan IIIB.
There's one rule: never take the imagery away from the president. The images that we got back from space were so significant in order to allow us as a free democracy to understand how we played in this world. As the systems grew in capability, they grew in weight. We had to turn to Titan to get these systems on orbit. So today, on a regular basis, we provide information to the President, the Congress, the administration, to